Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into the Cloud Native FM podcast. This is your co host for this show, and you are watching episode number 113. And my name is Saim Safdur, a co host of this show. And if you've been following this channel quite lately, we have been actually spending a lot of time on the platform engineering stuff, but I have changed some gears and today we're talking about developers, and it's all about some of the pain they have facing and how our developers today are different from past. But I believe platform engineering and developer and some of the distinction between a platform engineering and application development is both subtle and significant. Application developer focus primarily on front end and back end components, working closely with business units, and platform engineering engineer operates behind the scene. So in this episode, we sit with Ivan Burazin, CEO and co-founder of Daytona.io, and we will try to understand why setting up development environment are still frustrating. If it is, why? And what are the solutions we have? And good thing about Daytona, they have raised 5 million in their newly funding led by Upfront VC. And that's all about some of the introduction we have. Let's go straight to Ivan, and he will give us a quick introduction of himself. Over to you, Ivan. You are live now. Can you give us a quick intro of yourself and some of the things that you're working on these days? Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and glad to be here. Really quick background, co-founder of, thanks for the follow down there, co-founder of Daytona. We've been working on Daytona for about 15 months, 16 months, but it's been part of a longer process. Basically, our life work, the co-founders of Daytona and I have been trying to solve dev environments. First, in 2009, we started with Code Anywhere, which some of your watchers may have used if they're older. And so we got a bit of success with that, but never really broke out. And so Daytona is sort of an evolution of that, trying to solve a similar problem. But yeah, that's what I got for starts. I'm happy to go through like questions and talk about more.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. So let me give some people a Git repository so people like what we are talking about. So it's hit 7K star. It's been a wonderful and exciting new space. I definitely recommend folks to watch out this space because this is super interesting. And I have been doing for a lot of the pain I have when it start developing during the cloud native environment. It's sometimes sophisticated and it has some great solution in Daytona. So please check that out and do let us know what you thought on this as well. And for some demos and talk, they have a wonderful YouTube channel as well. So I recommend folks to check out as well. So first thing first. So usually my first question is something around motivation and inspiration. So Ivan, what inspired you to get involved in open source development?
Well, this has been the first time the co-founders and I have actually launched an open source project at all. Like we've never done it. We've always like worked for other people or made our own proprietary projects. We were actually I think the word is scared of going into open source. So it was a very, very big challenge for us too. But like always back of our mind, we were like thinking about how we can do something. When we started Daytona, we started it as a enterprise product first. And so we kicked it off as an enterprise product. We have a couple of customers right off the bat, which was great. And we seem to be solving these issues of dev environments for these large enterprises. But what was sort of worrying for us is like, we're solving this for the people that can pay for it anyway, but who's going to solve it for everyone else? Because setting up a dev environment is painful for everyone. I mean, even if you're an open source contributor, you want to, spin up a project with that repository right away and just contribute and get out of there, instead of like, debugging, going through the README, debugging, figuring stuff out. And so it took us about 9 months to figure out how to open source something to be pure open source. Like we wanted it to be, so it's an Apache 2.0 license. So you can do basically whatever you want with it. We didn't want any restrictive licenses. So we had to figure out how we could sort of package that properly to give that to the community. And so we did that on March 6th of this year, and it seemed super successful. In 48 hours, we got 3,000 stars, and now we have about 7,000. So, I mean, it's a vanity metric, but it's still nice to see that people are, favoriting, so to speak, Daytona and looking at it.
Yes, absolutely. But I look at the repository and there are some interesting stuff in it. And one of the things I think today we definitely I want to learn from you as well, because we have so many opinion on setting up development environment, especially if folks work in the Kubernetes based environment. There are so many opinion into it. I can have install cluster locally or in the cloud or in the AWS on different hyperscaler as well. So there are so many opinion into it as well. When I look at Daytona, so it tells me it is infrastructure agnostic. So I want to learn from you that what does this mean for developer?
Sure. First off, infrastructure agnostic is something that is a core principle of Daytona, and everything that we do now or in the future should work generally vendor agnostic, not just infrastructure agnostic. Like every vendor should be able to plug in. So even if you look now, you have the possibility it supports every Git provider. Actually, one is missing. Someone put it yesterday. So obviously you have GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, but you have the on-prem ones. But you also have like Git Nest and Git T, Azure DevOps, and we don't support the one AWS has. Someone posted an issue the other day, so we'll get that one in there as well. So the idea is to be completely agnostic on what you're using. And so if you're looking for infra specifically, it's like, do you want to run it on your local machine? Fine. Do you want to run it on AWS? Fine. Do you want to run it on DigitalOcean? Fine. We don't care. But what we thought was really interesting is how do we solve this in a way that the user doesn't care either? So when I was doing my research for spinning up Daytona, we talked to a lot of these large tech enterprise companies that have built a similar product internally. So Google, Facebook, Tesla, Plaid, LinkedIn, Shopify, Spotify, Eventbrite, like all these companies have a similar service internally because it's such a big issue, but there's no actual vendor that solves this. And Shopify was specifically interesting because what they said is that they started with a standardized dev environment on their local machine, but then when developers needed to be, larger scale, they had to, spin up a remote machine. And they actually created a CLI tool that I forgot what the command was, so I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically spin up dev environment local or spin up dev environment cloud, and you'd get the dev environment working. You didn't care where it was. You just needed it to be remotely for some reason or locally, but the interface and the way you work with it as a developer was exactly the same. And that was sort of like the underlining thesis of Daytona. It's like, okay, great. Can we create a command, which we call Daytona create? You point to a repository and everything else is done. It doesn't matter if it's on your local machine or an EC2 instance. As a developer, it feels the same. Like everything feels the same. It's forwarded to localhost if it is or it isn't. You get a fully qualified domain name in the sense of like you can share a preview link to your dev environment. If it's local or if it's remote, like there's no difference to you as a developer, and that's the way it should be. You shouldn't have to think about these complexities. You should just point to where it is, it'll spin up, and you're good to go.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I look at the repository, there are some interesting use cases as well. And also, I think the approach you guys are actually taking is something very interesting because I totally believe that developers are today somewhat different from the past. When I started my development, we don't have that packaging system. We always fight with infrastructure engineer that this is not my fault. This is you running your code in production in Linux environment. I do development in Windows, so this is not my job. We keep fighting with each other. But now we have containerization technologies. We kind of do some standardization while shipping code from one place to the other. But I wanted to learn from you, based on your experience, the project you're running so far, how you think, how you think how developer are today are different from past.
I mean, it depends on where you're going from the past, because I feel I'm older than you probably. So when I started and my co-founders, there were these things called, I mean, they still exist, like IDEs, so integrated development environment. So you would have your Eclipse or your IntelliJ still exists, or Visual Studio, the original one that some people still use, but like today everyone uses VS Code. Like a large portion, I won't say everyone, but a large portion of people use VS Code. VS Code is a text editor. To be clear, to be very fair, it's the text editor on steroids, but nonetheless. And so the reason why these pieces of software were called IDEs is because everything was integrated. The dev environment was integrated. They were like these huge packages. I forgot the size because laptops were smaller back then, but it took a long time to install this thing. And so when you opened it up and you typed some code in it and you hit run, it worked because all the dependencies were there. Everything was there for you. Now, fast forward to where we are today, none of that is there because of microservices and all these things. You can't have all these things inside, right? So now it's totally fine to have a text editor with some plugins to make it fast, to make some things get done. That's sort of IDS, but the vast majority of things aren't there. Now it's up to you as the developer to set up your dev environment. And that's why I feel like the dev environment has actually become an issue, because you as a developer now actually have to do it. Whereas where I feel the future is, and I've said this a couple of times, I feel that it's really silly. So that there's these self-driving cars now available. Like there's Waymo in San Francisco, and I drove with it 2 months ago. So you push a button on your phone, a car comes, and it drives by itself. And so we're in 2024, and I can't automate my dev environment setup. Like that feels, but I can make a car move by itself. Like to me, that makes no sense, right? So can we make a service in that sense? Like, where am I going? Where am I going? Pick the type of car, done. So in that very similar sense, Daytona is like, which repo project do I want? Where do I run it running? What editor am I using? Go, right? That's absolutely it. So I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at, but that's some of my learnings from before and right now.
Yes, absolutely. 100% agree. I think this is a pain everyone is facing, because when you start developing locally, first thing you have to set up an IDE. So sometimes it's take a lot of time, and you have to pick one, you have to install it, you have to run it, and then you have some sort of, then you start making what are the programming languages you have, then it's testing environment, then APIs and proxies and load balancer. So there is so much stuff in there. And as you mentioned, I think I would definitely have a shame if we can't actually self service our development environment if we have a self-driving car. This is going to be a very challenging.
It feels silly. No, you have a self-driving car, but you can't have a self-set up dev environment, right? So that's silly. And so what we want in Daytona is that, you have one button and it just works, and you get into coding. Like nothing is hidden, but it's just automated, right? So if you're like a sophisticated engineer and you want to see what's going on under the hood, open up the hood and, get to work, take a look. But otherwise, if you're not interested, you don't care, just, write your code, make sure your product, project, website works, and, get on with your life or contribute to the project you're working on, right?
Yes, absolutely. And just the next question is around repetitive tasks from the developers. So one of the question when I feel when I'm working with development, some of my teammates, let's say, working on some cloud environment, and for me, in order to access those services, there is so much jargon in there. I can actually bring in all the cloud environment and run it locally in my machine. It took me huge stress, because it took hours or even days or even weeks to actually fully replicate the cloud environment, and then it start developing locally. So with Daytona, I see there are dev container in there. So how do you think some of the repetitive tasks, or especially if I have a front end developer and I need some back end services, how do Daytona can help me remove or reduce some of the repetitive tasks?
Sure, absolutely. So a lot of the repetitive tasks we actually automate inside. And so some of them is using like dev container, but some of them is not. One thing you can also do, and depending if you want to just work on remote, so there's providers that are coming out right now. We haven't launched them, but providers for all the major cloud players. And basically in Daytona, all you have to do is set a new, we call it a target, so where it's happening, and you add your credentials to AWS, and you don't have to ever log into AWS. So you said Daytona create on AWS, and it will use your credentials. It will go out there, it'll spin up the instances that it needs, and you'll just get your VS Code or IntelliJ up and running. And so you actually don't have to care or look at anything inside of AWS or Azure or GCP or whatever. And in that way, it makes your life, I think, just so much easier.
Yes, absolutely. And I think another feature I want you to tell us a little more about, because that's really are missing in some of the initial environment we had. So in Daytona, you automatically create a VPN connection between the client machine and development environment. Why you think this is the need today, and why we should care about all of these things?
I mean, security first. We came from, as I mentioned earlier, we started with the enterprise product. So when you're working for enterprises, everything must be secure. And then why not just offer that as well to the end user if they want? So what happens with Daytona when it spins up a dev environment remotely, so in AWS or anywhere else, it spins that up and it creates a VPN tunnel from that machine to your local VS Code. So everything automatically is encrypted and secure so that there's no loss or sniffing of your data that's happening. So you as an individual developer might not care about these things, but if you're working for any company, it's good to know that it's already built in there. So yeah.
Yes, and just a final question before we talk about some general community challenges and what are the biggest use cases Jotona can offer today. Just one final thoughts on the development environment. So let's say if I run Daytona Create, what are all the things happening behind the scene?
Oh yeah, so we actually wrote a whole blog post about this. So it'll
Yes.
probably take you anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes to do that. So when you run Daytona Create, and depending if it's creating locally or remotely, it will spin up a VM. So if it's remote, it'll spin up a VM for you, EC2, whatever. If not, if it's local, then it'll just go and spin up a Docker container in your machine. And so in that Docker container, it will create a dev environment, or in the EC2, it'll create a Docker container and a dev environment. After that, it will check out the repository. It will read through the repository. It will check for any configuration files. So think dev container, Docker file, Nix, and dev file are coming soon. And so if it sees those, it will execute against those, and it will install all those things. If there isn't, then it will check which sort of programming languages are in there, and then it will will add an image of a dev environment, which the user can configure, but we have one inside the box, which has most of the things already in there, so it makes your life easier. After that, it creates a VPN tunnel. It exchanges SSH keys with your local editor, creates a VPN tunnel. It also then creates, it ports everything to localhost. So if it's localhost, obviously it's localhost. But if it's remote, you still locally, it's on localhost. So you don't have to think of what's the IP address or whatever, it's all localhost. But lastly, what it does, it also adds a fully qualified domain name or reverse proxy. Basically, you get this long URL, XYZ, try Daytona, something, something, which lets you, if you make it publicly, from my local machine right now, I can share you a preview of my, Astro website or my documentation, whatever. Or if it's remotely, it works in the same way. So that means that the feedback loop from the engineering team to the manager or marketing or whatever is so much faster, because you don't have to push the staging for someone to see it. You can see it instantaneously. Is this good? Do you want me to change it? Does it work as you want? And I found that really, really useful my entire life, using sort of remote dev environments. And so all these things are done automatically for you. And so someone actually called it as a joke, said we're a wrapper for Docker. I mean, we will support more things than Docker, but I feel that Docker started the idea of, a standardization so the dev environment can, move to staging and testing and production. But there's still things around there that are missing to make sure it always works. And so we're doing all those things.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, 100%. I think if somebody is listening to you or us right now, they totally agreed. Where are you actually heading towards to? Because that is really a pain these days. Because right now, if you actually traditional development with containerization technology, you start building up your container, pushing them in a Docker or ECR repository, then making sure that the new environment has been built up, and then pulling the images if everything goes well, and then you move into the production. So all of these repetitive tasks, you love to work with Docker as engineer, you understand how wonderful Docker work, but these are literally a repetitive task. So I can understand, I can get the feeling if I work with Daytona, there are some things actually, there are some removal of steps that actually make become my life as a trial. And also you work with, I think Docker, as you mentioned, Docker made things so simple for us these days. Just run a command, Docker run, it's boom. If you Docker build, is build the images. Docker push is pushes the images. And also Docker has compose construct in it, but they have some limitation. And you are filling those limitations. So it's become go in the cloud as well. And also I think folks are familiar. Docker also came up with the terminology. You can build the image locally, then it's run and give it a location, and it's run on the cloud provider as well. They made those switching as well. But I think there are so many more steps in Daytona that the software development life cycle requires today. So I think it's really a great news if anybody is listening to us right now. So for the next phase, I wanted to, because you have spent some time with the customers, some time with the community, and you are been watching some event, going there, talking about some of the developer stuff. So, in your experience, while communicating with customers and the community, what is the biggest fear developer face today, and how can Daytona help reduce or eliminate it?
I mean, there's multiple things, but if we're talking about Daytona, I always say the works on my machine problem, like the famous problem, like, it doesn't work for me. And so your colleague says, well, it works on my machine, go figure it out, right? And so that is the number one fear, I think. And especially if you're a developer working on a lot of projects or very often have to change products, you very often have to, bang your head against the wall. So I think that would be it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think if people are not working on the containerization technologies on these kind of setup, they're still living in the same domain because we don't have anything standardized as yet as container, where that's tell you it's work on every different environment. It's become infrastructure agnostic, vendor agnostic. You just deploy the stuff onto it as well. So I think is even in the open source communities, I think this is a big pain in the past because you live in a different geographics, different environments, different machine, different hardwares, and you run at all the stuff working locally in your machine, and then you deploy in the PR in the main upstream project, and it's something break, and nobody figured it out what happened, where things going bad. So I think this can be easily understandably the most fear problem we have still today, even though we actually far away in this space as well. So what can you share, because I know there are some people working on Daytona today and they have some challenges they have been actually overcoming with Daytona, but I wanted to learn from you. Can you say some any specific use cases or scenario or somebody has been using, you have has made some Daytona has made some significant impact?
I mean, all of them hopefully have made significant impact. But one thing I feel that's sort of helped the wider audience is that when you're starting to learn to program, when you're starting to learn, the hardest part to explain to someone is there's two things you have to learn. One is writing the commands, writing the code. Two is setting up the dependencies or the dev environment. And so even if you write the code correctly, if some dependency is missing or whatever, the code still doesn't run. And you, as a learner, student, whatever you want to call yourself, you're still like having issues with it, right? And so a system like Daytona removed the underlying infrastructure problem, and then you only focus on your code. So if your code doesn't work, it's you, like it's the code, it's not something else. So it lowers the barrier of entry for people to start working. And I think that has been, I think for a personal level, the most impactful thing that Daytona helps with. But probably on a business level, the enterprise product has recently added support for GPUs, which has been like 4 out of 5 companies have asked for that. And I think it's just one, the cost of GPUs, and two, the actual availability of GPUs. Because the Daytona enterprise product does something called over high density. We call it high density. Basically, you can put more dev environments on the same hardware at the same time. For GPUs, it works slightly different, but still helps quite a bit with availability. So you can have essentially one GPU for like 4 people that you have. It varies, obviously, but it still helps because renting out an H100 in AWS is like $50,000 a month, and it's not even $50,000 a month. It's getting the ability to rent it. You can't click on it. You have to like request to have it, right? So just getting one enables the ability to have there, and I think that's been a large business impact that we've created quite recently.
Yes, and I think one thing we haven't talked about yet, and I want to learn from you as well. When we're developing in a team environment, we have 2,000 developers, 4,000, and they are geographically located in different region. So then we need to have some permissions in place when we're developing our environment. And is there any help or is there any path that the Daytona following, let's say we call a role-based access control or permission-based model?
All of those things exist in the enterprise product, but they're not in the open source. So the open source, the principles of the open source, it is for a single user. And so there's no logins there, there's no access control, there's no nothing, and they'll never be a part of it. The idea was, can we give all these features to the world for free, essentially, for the individual developer? Because we don't want to charge these people. It's hard enough for them already in the world that we live in. We want to give them out for free. But all the things that a large enterprise needs is willing to pay for are these things like security, compliance, or RBAC, SSO, and all these things. And so that is all part of the proprietary enterprise product that we created on top of the open source.
Awesome, great. So the next few things I want to learn, what is, because we are actually right now is July 16, the 6 month gone, 6 month coming ahead of us. So what wishes do you have for Daytona currently?
Oh, so many wishes, a lot of wishes for Daytona, obviously. But one thing that we have set a target for the next sort of couple of months is to be the number one, if we can call it, dev environment or CDE or DEM in the world using public metrics. So, community size, GitHub members, contributors, usage, all the things that you can measure publicly. Can we be number one? We've had competitors in the space for like 7 years. And so we've been around for a year and a half, a little less. And so we're already probably number 3 or 2. And so we want to get to number 1 in the next quarter. And so that's super aggressive. That means all our curves have to go at a very high angle. But we are pushing towards that, and it seems that it's going in that direction.
Yes, absolutely. I think for the development environment, the DevX space in particular, sometimes I see as a Formula One car driving, because the difference between both of the cars is so many, 110,000 of the second or 100,000 of the second. But I think the way it's actually removes some of the repetitive tasks, it has a full potential to become a number one, because developer only want, because if you talk to the developer, the one of the pain they have, if they come up with an idea, oh, I have this idea, I want to implement it. Implementing an idea means you have to spend 40 minutes just to spin up all the things. And they don't like it. They want, I can click a button like Daytona and create, and then I work on my idea, because I want to go away go away at home at 6 p.m. and nobody want to talk to me again. I am free. So that's the potential I think Daytona can give, and it has a good potential to become number one. So now, what are the feature development in the open source dev manager we call Daytona as, are planned in the next few months?
So basically the things that we have a public roadmap, so you can take a look, everyone can take a look. It's all on GitHub. Pre-builds are coming. So basically the ability for, once you've spun up a project, the next time it's just like instantaneous. It's fast like this, but this will be instantaneous, right? That's something that's been requested a lot. And providers, as I mentioned, so providers for all the major cloud vendors. And lastly, a plugin system. So we will be launching, we call it a workspace plugin system. So you'll be able to build plugins for the dev environments themselves. And so those are things that are coming up in the very, very, very short term. So yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to it as well. And if I have some wish, I definitely put in the roadmap as well, because there are some wishes I have to particularly. So we talk about a lot of the technological stuff, but now I wanted to learn how does a typical day look like for CEOs creating solution for the developer community?
You mean like my typical day? What does it look like?
Yes.
My typical day is just so it is more emails and calls than anything else, unfortunately, and airplanes. I do travel quite a bit, and so you're basically a large communicator. I found so you're communicating one with the community, two with customers, three with investors, and four with your internal team. And so you're trying to get all these different they're all hitting against you or going away from you, whatever you want. You're trying to align all these things and to go in the same direction. That's sort of the biggest job that you have to do. And sort of like, how can you get, your marketing team, engineering team, and investors and customers, and everyone wants to go in that same direction. And obviously the direction is not the one that I always put. Like sometimes you see that something makes sense and you have to adjust left or right. But that is a very, very hard thing to do, I have to tell you. And the more people you have involved, the harder it is to get them in alignment. But when you do get them in alignment, then you get like all your horses in a row, and then you're just moving super fast.
Absolutely. Can we call the CEOs as chief email outputters? Because one of the
Yeah,
podcasts I did with LinkedIn founder, he said, I said, what do you mean by CEOs? He said, my job is chief email outputter. So I think
absolutely.
we can definitely
Absolutely.
relate to that. And also on the skill wise, do you think the CEOs are somewhat similar to the football manager or the coaches, where they actually look ahead? Oh, there's a 11 player in the ground playing, and they have to pick the right place for the right individual, and then tell them, "Oh, no, we need to switch things up, we have to change things a bit, there's a red card, let's say, sometime, and you have to become a 10-player team." So do you think is that there are some similarities between CEOs and the football coaches?
Absolutely. I haven't thought of it. I always do the analogy of the Formula One, but like same sport, like sports, same. Definitely you do have to manage all the teams, make sure that they're all excited, make sure that, you have fans, you make sure of all these things. It's definitely, there's a lot of similarities. I'd say there's more similarities than differences between the two.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we definitely have to. I want to, like, we have this because the football. There's a Europe Cup, and there's a Copa America happening. But I
Yeah.
definitely think there's a Formula One analogy definitely headed, because there's another Formula One heading to the Hungary, and looking forward to watching as well next this Sunday. So before I let you go, some people look at the solution and they're very interesting. They wanted to try out. They wanted to know how this solution can help them out. So they wanted to meet you. So how do we as a community can catch you up in the conference plan for later this year?
Sure. I mean, conferences, I will be We Are Developers in Berlin for sure. And I do attend usually a lot of conferences, but the world has changed for me quite a bit. So not sure where I'm going to be. The thing that I do know is Daytona does a bunch of road shows. We did one last week across the African continent. We're going to do some across India next month, and then Europe and America the month after that. And you can find them all on Luma, so lu.ma/Daytona. You can find all the events that we're going to organize. And they're great. They have anywhere from like 50 to 250 people come to these things. So they're like mini conferences themselves. Outside of that, I'm on Twitter. So Twitter/first name, last name. Also, we have a large community Slack, and you can DM me in there if people want that. So it's on our website. I think it's go/Daytona, but you can check it out. You can share it afterwards. On Daytona IO in the footer, there's a link to the Slack community. There's like almost 2,000 people in there, but I am in there every day. And so people can like tag me or DM me, and I'm happy to reply with any questions they may have.
Awesome, absolutely. I will drop all those links as well so people can check that out as well. And also, all these talks sometime might be landed in this YouTube channel as well, and you can also watch the recording, what's happened there as well. So before I let you go, we want some conclusion what we have talked about it. So within a 1 minute or 30 second, it's up for you to tell us if someone
it looks like we lost them. So if you guys all still hear me, I might as well do the conclusion. So thank you for joining the podcast. With Daytona, hopefully we can help you solve your issues if you're just starting or if you're a senior engineer. Also, we're looking for a bunch of contributors, also launching a new bounty program. So feel free to check out our GitHub repository, hit a star, follow us. We'd love to have you here. Also, keep watching this podcast. It's awesome. And I'll just say for everyone here, have a good day.